The rare big news mid-August, Rick Carlisle, multi-year contract extension with the Pacers. On one hand, everybody gets why it happened. On the other hand, we're going to break down the timing, why Carlisle getting a new deal makes a ton of sense, and why, before a gap year, they should have done this. It's all coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today, surprise, was supposed to be the day off this week. Instead, the biggest day this week, Rick Carlisle, contract extension with the Pacers. Well-deserved for obvious reasons. We'll talk about the why for the Pacers, the when for the Pacers, what comes next as a result of this. But a big day for the Pacers as they once again, for the second time, extend Rick Carlisle, right? And that has been very telling about how this hire and partnership has gone. In 2021, Carlisle was hired, and that should be the end, by the way, of the word retread. Carlisle comes from another team. Some fans hate it. They go from 25 to 35 to 47 to 50 in wins. They are 5-2 in playoff series. A winning coach stays a winning coach. But first of all, they extend him after the 37 win season. And that was a telling sign of the already good relationship the Pacers and Carlisle had, is that pre any success, they identified that what they hoped would happen had happened, right? And that is that they finally, right, after wandering aimlessly a little bit in the Nate 1 to Nate 2 to Rick transition, and then this is a Vic team to a Sabonis team to a Tyrese team era, they didn't have an identity. They didn't have a clear way of going either direction, bad or good. And they didn't have a star that could win them stuff, right? They didn't even win playoff games with that previous era team, right? They needed something to guide them. And since they've hired Rick, they obviously had that bad first year. And then they got Tyrese Haliburton, and they got an identity, and they've gotten consistently better and better and better. And so reason one why you obviously would extend Rick Carlisle now is whatever happened 2 years ago. They extended him in 2023, basically right when the season started. Back then, Rick Carlisle did a great job getting the Pacers from off the track to on the track and getting them on a clear direction of growth. And if you remember, that summer was when they, well, not quite that summer, I think it might have been a year before, was when they were talking a lot about 5-year planning, long-term thinking, and all that kind of stuff, which, again, was the right decision, right? And so then they go straight to the conference finals. And so you wonder at the time of the first extension if the thinking was, all right, here you go, Rick, you've done a great job. Now lead the franchise to wins. And look at what the last 2 years have been, right? They go over their over-under 2 years ago by quite a bit, win 47 games. Haliburton is an all-NBA level player, so good that they trade for Siakam, so good that they can lure Bruce Brown, right? They're developing other players, which we'll talk about in a second. And they've reached the conference finals as a 6 seed. And that's where he really reestablishes himself with the Pacers, is winning in the playoffs and looking very convincing in doing so with a style that is unconventional, right? High-paced teams typically didn't win in the playoffs. The Pacers did. They upped the pressure full court. They played their way. They didn't change how they played to traditional playoff norms, and they won. And then the next year, with very little turnover, they still find a way to get better. They get to the playoffs with home court advantage this time. His unique strategy on player minutes, which I wrote a story about, helps them be healthy for the playoffs. His identity that he said helps them recover from a dismal start. That coalesces into a healthy, talented identity team with home court advantage this time. They beat the Bucks. They beat the Cavs. They handled the Knicks, and they're off to the NBA Finals. So first 2 seasons for Carlisle with the Pacers, get him on the track, get an extension. Second 2 seasons, find the success, get an extension. He has met the bar set for him every single time. In fact, I would say in this case, the last 2 years especially, vastly overshot it, right? A fantastic job getting the Pacers to win games, win meaningful games. Last season was the best success season in Pacers franchise history. And obviously it was one game away from something way more. But like that, you want to keep that together for as long as possible. I don't need to explain the Rick Carlisle resume to you, but it's, to me, even easier to talk about why this extension makes so much sense when you talk about the first one and how they continued that crescendo up and up and up and up for all these years. Now, I will never forget his first season 3 years ago, when they did go 25 and 57, and they were not very good. And Carlisle was hired to turn that era of team around, the team with Sabonis and all those players. And I'll never forget it. They're playing the Heat pretty early in the season in Miami. It's a TNT game, right? A rare national TV game for a not particularly good Pacers team. This game is December 21st. I would love to go back and figure out what their exact record was at the time. I want to say they were like 10 and 15 or something. And Carlisle had talked about, like, at that time, a lot of the talk had been like no edict on like you have to win or requirement of winning or anything like that. But they clearly were not having the record that they hoped to have. And then they lost. Jared Greenberg reported on the broadcast that night that Carlisle said he came to Indiana to win, right? And that was the first time that had been like very clear that they hoped with the double bigs and the Brogdon that they could be a winner. They lost that night, and then they won 2 of their next 12 games, and then they won twice in a row, then lost 3 in a row, culminating in the Charlotte Hornets scoring 158 points in Indy, and they had a bad record. They had an embarrassing home loss to a bad team. And they pivoted directions that day. And so those first 49 games through that Charlotte game, things were not great. And then things have been just fantastic in the trend line for the Pacers since then. And so the wins have come. Carlisle has been a big part of that. And the other thing, the reason I bring up that story is they had to pivot to a bad team at that point. And Carlisle was brought in as this winning coach he's been talked about as very malleable. He's had different teams with different styles and all that. But very few thought of him as a development guy, right? And a guy who was, reluctant at times in the past to play rookies. I remember reading a story from Tim McMahon and ESPN about how it was such a big deal years ago that Justin Anderson, former Pacer, got minutes under Carlisle in the playoffs with Dallas, right? That was atypical. And some players in the past, Tayshaun Prince obviously played as a rookie under Carlisle in the playoffs, but he's talked about how Luka, of course, changed his thoughts on playing young guys a little bit. But that is what made Rick different than what the coach that many expected when he got hired, which was this great wins coach, win the games guy that was talked about on that broadcast that Jared Greenberg talked about. And what's made him the coach that's been so good for the Pacers, beyond all the stuff I've already said, the winning, the malleability, the constant growth of this team, is he has become he and his staff, I would like to give everybody credit for this whole thing, have become awesome at player development, right? I'll never forget it. Jalen Smith did his press conference after they re-signed him and they did the Pacers colored pen and all that stuff. And we're talking to Carlisle off to the side because Jalen Smith came to the Pacers and was not good with the Suns and had all these restrictions on re-signing. And they talked about all this stuff that they hoped to do to keep him around, and they did. And they offered him starting spot. And Carlisle talked that day about working with Jalen Smith and helping him become a better player, and how much he was really enjoying and falling in love again with. Not that he didn't love it before because he loves coaching, but how much he was really enjoying that part of coaching, right? One-on-one work with players, skill development and growth with players. And Jalen Smith resigned and was quite good at times for the Pacers. And then he gets a bunch more money to go to the Bulls, and he's gone now. But that is what has made Carlisle go from really good winning coach to just like fantastic all-around incredible head coach for the Pacers, is that he's developed too. He's developed players as well, both in terms of guys coming from other teams, coming to the Pacers and either getting better or being a perfect fit in their style that makes them good. Jalen Smith is one of those guys. Tyrese Haliburton is one of those guys. Obi Toppin, Aaron Nesmith, Jordan Nwora, even. I mean, you could talk about lots of guys who theoretically fit that bill, and that's just young guys. Like even that, Pascal Siakam got better, right? He's a better defender. He's a better shooter now than he was. Like you could extend that thinking to vets. Jay Huff and James Wiseman will certainly hope they're the next, even though in Wiseman's case, he was not a traded player, right? Development extends to young guys. Andrew Nembhard has gotten better being drafted by the Pacers. Isaiah Jackson has gotten better being drafted by the Pacers, right? Mathurin and Walker have gotten better, maybe not at the rate some thought because of their draft slot. Ben Shepherd certainly has gotten better, right? And so Furphy, we'll see what happens there, looking good from year 1 to 2. So Carlisle not only bringing wins, constant growth of wins, 50-win season for the Pacers, hosting a series for the first time in over a decade. You don't count the bubble year because they didn't actually host the series. Getting them through rounds of the playoffs, and at the same time, really leveling up as a development coach. What more could you want, right? And so as they head into a gap year, that is the perfect coach you want. We'll talk more about that reality coming up here as we continue to talk about Rick Carlisle's contract extension on Locked On Pacers. Before we do that, we got to talk here about Monarch Money. Most people cannot name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That is why Monarch Money exists. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together into one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. They do the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. So many reasons to like it. Linking your accounts obviously helps you see things like spotting subscriptions that you don't even know you're using, seeing what categories you're spending maybe too much in so you could save more every month, review finances with your partner. You could see budget, set goals, and so much more activity all in one place. Do not let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making this your first listen today and every single day. Make your second listen Locked On Wizards. John Wall retired, my favorite player ever. I hope they're talking about him today. I have no idea what their offseason schedule is. I was very sad to see John Wall retire. And Locked On NBA, because we talked about Carlisle and John Wall on that show. And on Locked On NBA, Wes Goldberg and I host every Tuesday night and post Tuesday nights or Wednesday mornings. He asked me about the timing of this Carlisle extension. It's August 19th. That this happened. It's August 20th when this episode comes out. You know, why now? What does this mean? Joe Mazzulla just got a contract extension too. If you're good, if you set an identity, your team's going to want you, full stop. But the other part of Wes's question was like, they're coming into a season without Haliburton. What makes this the right time for the Pacers? And I answered that with kind of what I just said in the first segment. Heading into the year the Pacers are headed into, where they don't have Tyrese Haliburton and they lose Miles Turner, they're not going to be as good, right? Why is this the perfect time to extend Carlisle? Because he's not just a winning coach anymore. And that saying he's just a winner sells him short. He's got the development track record now. And this is obviously a big year to flex those muscles as the Pacers. But the fact that he's gotten all these guys to be better and have little skill growth here and there, that is partially, and in some fans' view entirely, what this year is all about. Can Andrew Nembhard become a better shooter? Can Ben Mathurin's fit improve a little more? And we're going to talk more about him in that department when it comes to Carlisle later in this episode, right? Can Aaron Nesmith add any more to his game? He has every year with the Pacers so far. Can Isaiah Jackson get better after his Achilles tear? What does Obi Toppin have more to show? Jay Huff's only 26, turns 27 like this week. Or maybe I have that wrong by a year. Ben Shepherd, Jarris Walker, Furphy. What's their next steps look like? All of that will not only be telling about how good the Pacers are this year and how good those players can be, but also how good the Pacers can be when Haliburton does return. And so if you have a coach who can win you games when your team is at its peak and can develop your players when your team might have a year with their star player on the bench for the whole season, that's who you should want. Perfect time for the Pacers to do this, even without the same ceiling they've had the last couple of years this coming season. So that's part of why the timing is so great. The other reason is Rick Carlisle has tons of reasons to ask for an extension right now. He just made the freaking NBA Finals, and the Pacers should say, yep, you deserve it. You absolutely deserve it. I do not know the specifics of the years. It is very hard to get decision maker, coach, contract details. But both times Carlisle got extended, it was described as multi-year extensions. The first year deal he got, Tim McMahon and ESPN reported, was 4 years, $29 million. He extended 2 years after that. You never know with coaching extensions if it's like they picked up an option and added 1 year. But even if that was the case, and then that same thing happened now, he would at least have 3 or 4 years left on his contract. So congrats to Rick Carlisle. Well earned. This is good for the Pacers. Obviously, I've always been high on Rick Carlisle's coaching. You guys can go back and listen to mailbags where people ask me questions about this. And I stand by everything I've said about him. And he is going to be the Pacers coach for longer now. Well-deserved. We'll ask players about. Players have appearances coming up in the next 10 or so days for the Pacers. We'll ask them about it too and get plenty of insight on what they think about this. But I've heard from players, I mean, you've heard their quotes. Like I put an Aaron Nesmith quote about how he thinks Rick's been so important for his career and his development in my story about this. But like I've heard privately from players all the time about how much they think Rick has helped them and like made them a better player and made them a better NBA player, not just like for the Pacers player, which helps them so much in their career. They're all very appreciative of what he's done in that player development department. And that is what I think has separated him, one, from what I thought of him, but two, it's what separated him from some other NBA coaches, right? He's very good at this. And the Pacers now have him for a long time. Great hire after a year of not making the right hire. And that shows the difference in coaching. And again, makes the term retread suck. The right coach is the right coach, regardless of their experience. Okay, let's pivot to other stuff that's happened in recent days. And by recent days, I mean like a week ago now, actually. Rick Carlisle, speak of him, pre-extension, hopped on 107.5 The Fan last week, I believe for the second time this offseason, speaking with the guys on the morning show. And lots of stuff from this. Some newsy things in here as well, including him talking about a rat game and saying no disrespect to rats, which actually made me laugh out loud. It was so funny. The way that cut through the interview. But he used the term rat game to describe the type of games Ben Mathurin could be great in. When talking to Caitlin Cooper a long time ago, we've talked about the Mathurin starting stuff. First off, he said Tyrese Haliburton in good spirits, progressing. If you didn't see, Tyrese Haliburton posted a slight Puma promotion, slight health update that he is out of crutches. I'm sure he's still wearing the boot every so often on that torn Achilles foot, but in the picture, he was certainly not. At the time, said he's progressing positive. He said it's felt like it's gone faster than he maybe expected. If you didn't see also, he mentioned this, Tyrese Haliburton did propose to his girlfriend back in Ames after he did a basketball camp out there in Iowa State. So good for Tyrese Haliburton's progression. He's talked a couple times about where he's at now because he did a camp at Oshkosh North as well, his high school alma mater. And so there are some health updates out there about him. Carlisle provided some. The reason I'm not totally going into those is he's hosting a camp in Indy pretty soon, and we'll talk about what he says to me and other people at that time on this podcast next week. But obviously, health progression for Tyrese Haliburton. That'll be the first time he speaks to Indy media since the finals, right? So that will, of course, be a big deal. Looking forward to that, but congrats to him, and that's good news for the Pacers. But when talking about Haliburton recovering from an Achilles tear, Carlisle mentioned Isaiah Jackson and James Wiseman. And the phrase he used that was interesting when talking about Achilles tears, and this is something that the Pacers certainly will hope is the case, as currently 3 of the 5 players on their team are either about to recover or recovering from Achilles injuries. He said these guys don't just recover, they make a full recovery. That seems to be optimism from Carlisle that all of these players can be close to or at their normal selves upon returning. They are fortunate that all 3 of them are quite young, but that is a trend that I'd say since Durant has kind of shifted perception for this injury, but some players are never the same. So that is good confidence from Rick Carlisle about what that could look like. And I do think that will be a very small subplot that has been, a few people have floated this around, in my comments into me this offseason, but to worth watching this season is, of course, Haliburton's recovery is going to be, everybody's Achilles tear recovery is different than the next guy, but seeing how the Pacers handle Isaiah Jackson and James Wiseman and them getting a chance to trial run a guy coming back from an Achilles tear will be big for Haliburton, right? Fans will learn a lot about what the players should look like and what the expectations be. The Pacers will learn a lot about how to handle it, right? So that's good news. Speaking of those guys, Isaiah Jackson did do 5-on-5 work, or is at the 5-on-5 stage. As he told me in my interview that I posted after Summer League, Carlisle saying he should be ready for camp. James Wiseman should be ready for camp. They're at similar stages, he said, of the rehab process. And he has turned the page quickly because of who he is as a person from the finals. He also said some stuff about Jay Huff and about Ben Mathurin and about some other offseason stuff, including something new that I heard him say that made me perk my ears up about potential camp battles and signings for the Pacers, plus Ted Wu, the assistant GM. He talked with Alex Golden and Facci on setting the pace, albeit with less revealing information. What did he say? We'll get to so much more to close out today's Locked On Pacers. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Locked On NBA for your second listen. This not very newsy part. We're Locked On Lakers. Luka Doncic is playing on Eurobasket and got hurt and then came back from injury. Yikes, that's scary. That's never what you want to see as a team. Locked On Lakers. We'll have more on that. Rick Carlisle, a couple more things he said that were interesting to me. One, he's been watching some Memphis games, specifically ones against the Pacers, to get more of a deep dive into Jay Huff and what he could bring to the team. I think there's some excitement about what he could be. Talked more about Ben Mathurin. This is his first time after speaking with Caitlin Cooper, being asked about Ben Mathurin starting. Another phrase Rick Carlisle used was, why wait? Totally agree with that. Again, Tyler Smith and I landed on that conclusion when we talked about this. And then he said the same thing. I'm going to have to keep beating this into listeners because it drives me crazy when people say it's a narrative. The fit stuff is a narrative. He said again, Ben Mathurin has to continue to move his game in the direction of being a highly effective part of the Indiana Pacers. Right? Run faster, run harder, quick decisions, guard great players. I think they're certainly going to put Ben Mathurin on some tough defensive assignments to maybe shield Nembhard from being like defending the best guy and being the lead point guard this season. But again, for Mathurin this year, as much as it being his fourth year and him just getting better as a player as part of the season, fit will be the question for a lot of the year. And we've heard that crumb a lot. And it's not just people making it up out of thin air. It is the Pacers talking about it. Even Ben Mathurin talked about it all those years ago. And he mentioned like, yeah, I realized at one point I'm not the best player in my team for the first time in my life. Right. Anyway, some of that still very insightful about running hard, running to the corners, and who he could guard. That was the first time I think. I think Ben Mathurin's a pretty good on-ball defender, but him being locked into that and doing that consistently will be a big part of his fit and getting better as a player. As for Miles Turner, he did admit this time, surprised to have lost him when I asked him out in Vegas. He said, quote, we'll be fine. And that was it and moved on. But surprised to have lost Miles. He talked more about the center by committee stuff. When I went back and looked at it with the Mavs, I went back to like the Salah Mejri, Dwight Powell, Maxi Kleba, some other guys' teams. He went back even farther, talking about when he did center by committee in the past. To throwback, remember some of these guys: Samuel Dalembert, DeJuan Blair, Wizards legend, Brendan Wright. Talked about playing all three of those guys as well. In this Wiseman reality, with him on the team as well. And look, like he's the third center, and I think it's very clear he's the third center. There people very fewer than last offseason, but people have asked about like, could he be the backup? Like, look at the financial and trade decisions they made. It's pretty clear what their pecking order is. But he's going to play because Isaiah Jackson probably can't play back-to-backs, and it's unclear what his health status will be to open on opening night this year. He's still going to matter. Tony Bradley's name came up. Two things. One, I said this, and this makes good sense with his contract non-guaranteed, but Carlisle said he will be in camp for the Pacers, right? I've said that a lot. Because of the non-guarantee, it makes a ton of sense for him to be there, to be an option, to battle for a spot and see what happens. That does not mean he's going to make the team, but just because people keep saying he's non-guaranteed, his roster spot, is in the way of a point guard. No, they could still bring him into camp and just sign a point guard. So one, Tony Bradley is going to be in camp. So expect to see more Tony Bradley this year. But he also said that there'll be 4 guys slugging it out for 3 center spots. That made me wonder if they don't feel like they're going to keep 4 centers. Even if, and we'll see if they end up signing another player. There's been like breadcrumbs that they're considering a point guard. We'll talk about one of those breadcrumbs in a second. Chad Buchanan kind of hinted at it on setting the pace. It certainly is the most obvious position they would need someone. Obviously, they have Cam Jones or AJ Dennis, Quentin Jackson, but like a real steady hand behind McConnell and Nembhard, they don't have that right now. So I would think they'd look at that at least, and they've dropped some crumbs that they would bring in someone else for camp. They made some late signings before, like James Johnson and Langston Galloway for like a week before training camp a few seasons ago. Brad Wanamaker was signed in camp, albeit that was because of a trade a few years ago. So it's not like it needs to happen right away. Like Cole Swider got signed in August last year. But regardless, there's been enough signs that Tony Bradley's spot, even if they don't sign another point guard, is like maybe tenuous. We'll see. But that was the first time I think we've heard slugging it out for 3 center spots instead of just like, oh yeah, they could keep 4 because 2 of them are coming off an Achilles tear, although they also could use another guard. And the thing that's changed since a lot of those center discussions from earlier in the offseason is Enrique Freeman's gone. They don't have that option of him being the 4th center anymore, and they don't have a center on a 2-way deal, right? In fact, it's all guards. So maybe that lessens their desire to go get one when they have Q, they have Ray J. That could slide in, and Cam Jones is obviously on the team. Those are rookies or less proven players. Maybe you could count Quentin Jackson as somewhat proven, but not guys you're like dying to throw out there if you really, really need to win on a given night. Anyway, you can listen to that on 107.5 The Fan. I love that they cut out the interview from their whole morning show, and you can just hear that part on their site. That's very nice of them. So you can go find that with James Boyd and Kevin Bowen. Kevin Bowen performing that interview. Really good stuff. Rick always insightful in these offseason chats, and again, extended. So plenty more of them coming. I get a kick out of him promoting his morning show appearances during the season. Ted Wu, the assistant GM, the cap guru for the Pacers, who has been speaking on the record more the last couple of years, which has been fun to see. Sharp guy. He went on Setting the Pace with Alex and Facci. And one, I think you should listen to it if you're interested in just hearing about his journey to getting to the Pacers, because it's very different than the traditional basketball path of getting to the type of job that you'd think of when you think of an assistant GM for an NBA team. But insightful things obviously said from him, including talking about his first trade, although he did kind of lie about what his first trade was. But the Caris LeVert trade was his first significant trade that obviously had a bunch of hurdles. So that's a fun story if you want to go back and hear about the life of making a trade and the challenges on the team side of the emotions and the steps and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, as for actual news, one, navigating Exhibit 10 reality the Pacers are right now. This is about the time last year that they agreed to terms with like Kyle Mangus and Dakota Mathias to contracts. So expect some boom signings coming somewhat soon, I would say. If it is anyone signed, it would be guys that the boom already have their G League rights, not rookies. So anyone who was on the team last year, those are the guys that you would expect to see signings of if they're going to come back. They did trade away Cam McGriff. So there's not a ton of actually like returning guys who are obvious return candidates for those Exhibit 10s, but anyone who does, expect them pretty soon. Two, they are still evaluating the training camp roster and what could come of that. And the phrasing of on the table was used when asked about like point guard options. So again, that is the other breadcrumb, right? That if they, it's not that just that position, like they could sign anybody in any position if it makes sense for their team, if it's a point forward, if it's a whatever. But add him to the list with Carlisle's comments on three centers, with Chad Buchanan being talked about that. And a lot of this comes from Setting the Pace interviews. Good job by those guys. Just about the Pacers would consider another steadying hand. And I know a lot of people would say, Cam Jones, play Cam Jones. They just drafted him. And ironically, I've been thinking a lot about the debate of playing young guys and playing veterans in light of the Colts quarterback decision move. Locked On Colts does exist, by the way, if you're interested in hearing more about that. But in the Pacers case, I've also made the case on this very podcast about the value of a steadying hand on developing teams, even if this is a gap year. So if they find a vet point guard who's interested in a third guard role, might not play every night, but would have value to them, that should certainly be something they pursue. You'll learn a lot more about the Pacers and Ted Wu if you just listen to that podcast. It's been out for a little over a week. So many more news things could be coming right here on this podcast. When Tyrese Haliburton speaks, TJ McConnell has an event in Indy pretty soon. I actually want to dive more into James Wiseman, the preseason schedule, some Pritchard stuff, so much more to, in theory, get to. But that's it for today. Tomorrow will be the off day now this week. It was going to be today. Then we'll talk about who could win awards for the Pacers this coming season on Friday. Looking forward to that, mostly because I've had that show teed up for like a week and then stuff keeps happening or I keep changing. That's on me. Thank you guys so much for listening today. You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Tony R. East. And this podcast is at Locked On Pacers on both Instagram and Twitter. Back Friday, talking more Pacers. Till then, everybody, have a wonderful day.